The knife slipped against the bark, and Teresa Morgan cursed under her breath as a splinter lodged itself beneath her thumbnail. But she kept carving despite the pain because this tree, this magnificent oak with its sprawling branches that provided the only decent shade for miles, deserved to remember she had been here. Texas heat bore down on her shoulders as she worked the small blade carefully against the rough surface, forming the curves and angles of her initials with deliberate precision. Georgetown stretched out behind her, a collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets that had become her refuge 3 months ago when the stagecoach had broken an axle, and she had decided, quite suddenly, that continuing to San Antonio held no appeal whatsoever. She had been running from a marriage arrangement her father had made without consulting her, running from Philadelphia and its suffocating expectations, running towards something she could not yet name. The oak stood at the edge of what the locals called the Turner property. Though everyone knew Owen Turner rarely came to this particular corner of his land. He spent his days working cattle and breaking horses, building something substantial from the dust and grass that surrounded Georgetown in every direction. Teresa had heard about him in town, had seen him from a distance once or twice, but they had never spoken. She told herself that carving her initials in his tree was not really trespassing, not truly, because the shade belonged to everyone who needed it, and she needed it desperately. "That is my tree you are marking." Teresa spun around, knife clutched in her hand, heart hammering against her ribs. The man who stood 10 feet away had clearly approached on foot, his horse grazing quietly even further back, and she had been too absorbed in her work to hear either of them. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting, wearing work-worn clothes and a hat that had seen better days. His eyes, startlingly blue in his tanned face, fixed on her with an expression she could not quite read. "I apologize," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite her embarrassment. "I did not realize anyone would mind. I can try to smooth it over if you want." He moved closer, and she saw he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with the kind of lean strength that came from hard physical labor. When he reached the tree, he studied her handiwork without speaking for what felt like an eternity. She had carved TM. Inside a simple heart, the letters deep enough to last for years. "No need to smooth it over," he said finally. His voice carried a hint of something that might have been amusement. "I have been thinking this tree looked too plain anyway." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his own knife, a larger one with a handle that looked like bone. He positioned himself beside where she had been working and began carving with steady, practiced strokes. She watched in fascination as OT appeared in the bark, the letters matching hers in size and depth, placed right beside her own initials inside the same heart. "What are you doing?" The question emerged barely above a whisper. He paused to glance at her, and this time there was no mistaking the slight smile that tugged at his mouth. "If you are going to mark my tree, seems only fair I get to mark it too. I am Owen Turner, by the way, and you must be the woman from Philadelphia who has been staying at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, Teresa Morgan." She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "How did you know where I was from? Georgetown is not a big town. Word travels fast, especially when someone new arrives." He finished the second letter and stepped back to examine his work. Their initials now sat side by side within the heart, looking for all the world like a declaration of affection between two people who had known each other mere minutes. "There. Now we both have a claim on this tree." Teresa did not know what to say. Men in Philadelphia had courted her with flowers and poetry, with carefully orchestrated social calls and formal dances. But no one had ever done anything quite so boldly romantic as carving their name beside hers on a tree. The gesture felt both wildly presumptuous and oddly right, as if something significant had just shifted in the fabric of her life. "You do not even know me," she pointed out, trying to sound rational while her pulse raced. "That can be remedied." Owen slipped his knife back into his pocket and met her eyes directly. "I know you left everything familiar to come to Texas. I know you like this tree enough to risk trespassing for it. I know you have a steady hand and patience, based on how carefully you carved those letters. That seems like a decent start." A hot breeze rustled the leaves above them, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. Teresa felt the weight of decision pressing down on her, the sense that whatever she said next would matter more than most words she had spoken in her life. "I suppose it is a start," she agreed. His smile widened, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. "Would you like to see the rest of the property?" "I have about an hour before I need to get back to work, and this tree is honestly the least interesting part of the land." She should have declined. A proper lady did not go wandering off alone with a man she had just met, regardless of how kind his eyes seemed or how her heart had inexplicably decided it recognized something essential in him. But Teresa had left proper behind in Philadelphia, had abandoned it along with her father's disappointed expectations and her mother's quiet despair. "I would like that," she said. Owen collected his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and they walked together across the rolling landscape. He pointed out the boundaries of his property, explaining how he had bought the land 2 years ago with money saved from working cattle drives up to Kansas. The ranch was still small, more dream than reality, but she could hear the passion in his voice when he talked about his plans. "I want to build something that lasts," he told her as they paused on a low rise that overlooked a creek lined with cottonwoods. "Something that means more than just surviving season to season. My father spent his whole life drifting from one job to another, never putting down roots. I want different." "What happened to your parents?" Teresa asked. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her in the space of 3 days. My father tried to keep us together, but he was not built for staying in one place. He drank too much and gambled what little money we had. I left when I was 16, worked my way south, learned everything I could about cattle and horses and land." Owen's voice remained matter-of-fact, but she heard the old pain underneath. "He died about 5 years ago. Someone sent me a letter letting me know. By then, I was already in Texas, already planning this ranch." "I am sorry," Teresa said, and meant it. He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features as if he was not accustomed to sympathy. "What about you? What made a woman from Philadelphia run all the way to Georgetown, Texas?" She had not told anyone the full story, had kept the details of her flight private, but something about the way Owen looked at her, with genuine interest and no judgment, made the words come easier. "My father decided I would marry his business partner, a man of 45 who has already buried 2 wives. He did not ask me, did not consider that I might have my own thoughts about who I should spend my life with. He just announced it one evening as if he was discussing a contract for goods." Teresa found herself clenching her hands, remembering her fury. "I told him no. He said I had no choice, so I made a choice. I took the money I had inherited from my grandmother, bought a ticket west, and left. Does your family know where you are?" "I sent a letter from Georgetown letting them know I was safe, but not where exactly I had settled. My mother will worry, but she will not push my father to find me. She knows what it is like to live without choices." Teresa looked out across the creek, watching the water catch the afternoon light. "I do not have a grand plan like you do. I just knew I could not stay there, could not become another woman who disappeared into a marriage that made her invisible. "You could never be invisible," Owen said quietly. The certainty in his voice made her turn to face him. They stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, close enough that when he lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to step away, his fingers barely brushed her cheek. "I should get you back to town," he said, though he did not immediately lower his hand. "But I would like to see you again, if you are willing." "I am willing," Teresa whispered. Over the following weeks, Owen became a constant presence in her life. He would ride into Georgetown in the evenings when his work was done, and they would walk together through the streets or sit on the porch of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, talking until the stars filled the sky. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the house he wanted to build near the oak tree, about breeding horses that would be known throughout Texas for their quality. She told him about her love of books, about how she had spent hours in her father's library escaping into other worlds, about her hope of perhaps opening a small school someday where girls could learn more than just how to be ornamental. Georgetown had been established back in 1848, and by this summer of 1873, it had grown into a proper town with churches and businesses and people who were building lives with determination and hope. Teresa found work helping at the general store, and the owner, Mr. Patterson, appreciated her neat handwriting and head for figures. It was not the life she had imagined back in Philadelphia, but it felt more genuine, more hers. One evening in late July, Owen arrived at the boarding house with a basket and a blanket. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." They rode together on his horse, Teresa seated in front of him with his arms bracketing her as he held the reins, and she leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his shirt. The familiarity between them had grown naturally, each conversation and shared moment weaving them closer together. When they reached the oak tree, Teresa saw that Owen had prepared a meal, simple but thoughtful, with bread and cheese and apples, and even a jar of lemonade kept cool in the creek. They sat on the blanket beneath the branches that had witnessed the beginning of their story, and ate while the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have been thinking," Owen said after they had finished eating, setting aside his plate and turning to face her more fully. "About what I want, what matters most. I thought for so long that it was just the land, just building something permanent, but these past weeks with you have taught me that none of it means anything without someone to share it with." Teresa felt her pulse quicken. "Owen, let me finish," he said gently. "I know we have not known each other long. I know by the rules of society back east I should court you for a proper amount of time, ask your father's permission, do everything according to tradition. But we are not back east, and you did not come all this way to follow rules that never served you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple silver with a small blue stone that caught the fading light. "This was my mother's," he continued. "The only thing of hers I kept. Teresa Morgan, I am asking you to marry me, to build this life with me, to turn my dream into our dream. I am asking you to be my partner in every way that matters." She looked at the ring, at his face, at the tree behind them with their initials carved together in the bark. Everything in her life had led to this moment, every choice and risk and act of courage. She had left behind everything familiar for a freedom she could barely articulate, and somehow, impossibly, she had found not just freedom but love. "Yes," she said, and watched joy transform his expression. "Yes, Owen Turner, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then his hands cupped her face and he kissed her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the feelings that had grown between them, all the hope and desire and certainty that this was right, that they were right together. When they finally drew apart, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day earning that yes," he promised. "You already have," Teresa assured him. They were married 3 weeks later in Georgetown's small church, with Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Patterson standing as witnesses, and half the town crowding into the pews to see the Philadelphia woman marry the cowboy who had claimed a piece of Texas dirt and turned it into something real. Teresa wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Owen wore his best shirt and a new hat. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared held all the promise of the future stretching before them. Owen had been working on a house, and though it was not yet finished, he had completed enough rooms to make it livable. He carried Teresa over the threshold that first night, and she laughed with pure happiness as he set her down in what would be their bedroom. The space was rough still, with unfinished walls and simple furniture, but through the window she could see the oak tree standing sentinel in the distance. "Welcome home," Owen said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Teresa leaned into his embrace, feeling the rightness of the words settle into her bones. "Home," she repeated softly. Their first months of marriage unfolded with the kind of happiness Teresa had not known was possible. She woke each morning to Owen's presence beside her, to the warmth of his body and the security of his love. They worked together to finish the house, and she discovered she had a talent for making a home beautiful with small touches, with curtains sewn from fabric purchased in town, and wildflowers arranged in jars and books lined up on shelves Owen built with his own hands. The ranch demanded long hours of hard work, and Teresa threw herself into it alongside Owen. She learned to tend the chickens and gather eggs, to maintain a vegetable garden despite the challenging Texas soil, to prepare meals that would sustain a man who spent his days in physical labor. Owen taught her to ride properly, with patience and encouragement, until she could gallop across their land with confidence, her laughter trailing behind her like music. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch Owen had constructed, watching the sun set beyond their property while they talked about everything and nothing. He continued to share his dreams, but now they were their dreams, plans for expanding the herd, for building a better barn, for creating something that would last beyond their own lives. "I want children," Owen said one night in September, his hand resting on her knee as they sat side by side on the porch steps. "I want this place to ring with young voices, want to teach a son or daughter everything I know, but only when you are ready. I will not rush you into anything you do not want." Teresa covered his hand with hers, feeling the calluses that had developed from constant work. "I want that too," she admitted. "I want to fill this house with family, with the kind of love neither of us had enough of growing up." He turned his hand over so their palms pressed together, fingers interlacing. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Teresa Turner. Every single day I see you, I cannot believe my luck that you were carving your name in my tree that afternoon." "Our tree," she corrected with a smile. "You carved your name there too, remember?" "Our tree," he agreed, and kissed her as the stars began to emerge overhead. By December, Teresa knew she was pregnant. She waited to tell Owen until she was certain, until the sickness that plagued her mornings had persisted for weeks, and her body had begun to change in small but unmistakable ways. She chose to share the news on Christmas morning, presenting him with a small package that contained a pair of tiny knitted booties she had secretly made. Owen stared at the booties for a long moment, then raised his eyes to hers with an expression of wonder. "You are sure?" "I am sure. We are going to have a baby, Owen, probably sometime in early summer." He let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, and when he set her down, she saw tears streaming down his face. "I am going to be a father," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "Teresa, I swear to you, I will be the kind of father my own never was. Our child will know every day that they are loved and wanted and cherished." "I know," she assured him, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. "That is why I said yes to you in the first place. I saw the kind of man you are, the kind of father you would be." The winter passed with Owen treating her like precious glass, constantly worried she was working too hard or lifting too much or not resting enough. Teresa found his concern endearing even when it bordered on excessive, and she let him fuss over her, because she understood it came from love and perhaps from fear, from his determination to protect what they were building together. Georgetown had become truly home to her by then. She had friends among the other women in town, particularly Sarah Wellington, whose husband ran the livery stable, and Margaret Foster, the minister's wife. They welcomed her into their circle, teaching her tricks for managing a frontier household and sharing the kind of practical wisdom that no Philadelphia finishing school had ever offered. When Teresa told her friends about the baby, they responded with genuine joy and immediately began planning a quilting bee to create blankets and clothes for the infant. Sitting with these women, stitching fabric together while they talked and laughed, Teresa felt a contentment she had never experienced in her old life. This was real friendship, based not on social standing or family connections but on mutual respect and shared experience. Spring brought wildflowers across the ranch land, painting the grass with spots of color, and Teresa's pregnancy became obvious to anyone who saw her. Owen seemed to walk taller, pride evident in every gesture when he spoke about the coming baby. He finished the second bedroom in their house, building a cradle from oak wood with such care and attention that Teresa cried when she first saw it. "The baby will sleep beside us at first," he explained, running his hand over the smooth wood. "But I wanted this ready, wanted our child to have something made with love." "Everything you make is made with love," Teresa said, her hand resting on her swollen belly where their child moved and kicked with increasing strength. On a June morning when the heat was already building toward afternoon intensity, Teresa's labor began. Owen rode hard to town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Grant, a capable woman who had delivered half the babies in Georgetown. By the time they returned, Teresa's contractions had strengthened, and she gripped the bedpost, breathing through the pain. "You are going to be fine," Mrs. Grant assured her with the confidence of experience. "First babies take their time, but you are young and strong. This baby will be in your arms before you know it." Owen stayed with her despite Mrs. Grant's initial protests that men usually preferred to wait elsewhere. He held Teresa's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and murmured encouragement as the hours stretched on. The pain was worse than anything Teresa had imagined, waves of it that seemed impossible to endure. But Owen's presence anchored her, gave her something to focus on beyond the agony. As the sun began to set, painting their bedroom in shades of gold and amber, Teresa felt an overwhelming urge to push. Mrs. Grant examined her and nodded with satisfaction. "It is time. Listen to your body, Teresa. When the next contraction comes, you push with everything you have." The final stage of labor blurred together in Teresa's memory afterward, pain and effort and Owen's voice saying her name over and over like a prayer. Then, piercing through everything, came the sound of a newborn's cry, and Mrs. Grant was laughing, saying, "You have a son, a beautiful, healthy boy." Teresa sobbed with relief and exhaustion as Mrs. Grant placed the baby on her chest. This tiny person with a red face and dark hair, who was already trying to move his head, already curious about the world he had entered. Owen's arms came around both of them, and when Teresa looked at his face, she saw tears streaming down his cheeks. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son, Teresa." "What should we name him?" she asked, unable to look away from the miracle of their child. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, holding their baby while the last light of day faded from the room, Owen said, "James. James Henry Turner, after my grandfather, who was the only person who was ever kind to me when I was young." "James," Teresa repeated, testing the name. "James Henry Turner. It is perfect." Mrs. Grant stayed through the night, helping Teresa with the first attempts at nursing, making sure both mother and baby were doing well. By morning, when she finally prepared to leave, she looked at Owen with approval. "You did good staying with your wife. Not many men have the stomach for it, but she needed you here. You are going to be a fine father to that boy." After Mrs. Grant left, Owen sat beside the bed holding James while Teresa dozed, exhausted from the long labor. She woke periodically to feed the baby, and each time she opened her eyes, she found Owen watching them both with an expression of such love and wonder that it made her heart overflow. The days after James's birth passed in a haze of sleeplessness and constant need, the baby requiring attention every few hours, day and night. Owen hired a young woman from town, Emma Sullivan, to help with the household chores so Teresa could focus on recovering and caring for James. Emma was 17, cheerful and efficient, and her presence made the adjustment to parenthood easier. As Teresa regained her strength, she marveled at how completely James had changed their lives. Every decision now factored in this tiny person who depended on them for everything. Owen proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring James to Teresa for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending whatever free time he had simply holding his son and talking to him about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. "He cannot understand you yet," Teresa pointed out with amusement one afternoon, watching Owen show James around the barn. "He will eventually," Owen said, completely serious. "And when he does, I want him to know everything. I want him to love this place like we do." By the time James was 3 months old, life had settled into a new rhythm. Teresa had recovered from childbirth and felt more like herself, though her body had changed in ways that sometimes surprised her. Owen made sure she knew he found her beautiful, his hands and words leaving no doubt about his desire. And when they finally came together again as husband and wife, it felt like a homecoming, a reaffirmation of the bond that had created the child sleeping in the next room. Autumn painted the Texas landscape in golds and browns, and Teresa bundled James in blankets to take him outside, wanting him to experience the beauty of the land that would be his heritage. They walked together, the three of them, out to the oak tree where everything had begun. The initials Owen and Teresa had carved looked weathered now, smoothed by time and elements, but still visible, still declaring that they belonged to each other. "We should bring him here every year," Teresa suggested, shifting James in her arms. "Take a day to come to this tree and remember how it all started." "Every year," Owen agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "And someday, when he is old enough, we will tell him the whole story. How his mother was carving her name in my tree, and how I knew right then that she was the one I had been waiting for." James began to fuss, and Teresa rocked him gently until he settled. Looking at her husband and son with the oak tree providing its sheltering shade, she felt a surge of gratitude for the choices that had brought her here. Philadelphia seemed like another lifetime, a story about a different person. This was her real life, this ranch in Georgetown, Texas, with a cowboy who loved her and a son who carried their hopes into the future. The years unfolded with the steady progression of seasons, each bringing its own challenges and joys. James grew from infant to toddler, learning to walk by pulling himself up on furniture and staggering between his parents with determined steps. His first word was "Papa," and Owen's face when he heard it was something Teresa would remember forever, pure joy mixed with pride. His second word was "Mama," and Teresa cried happy tears. The ranch expanded as Owen's hard work and good judgment paid off. He increased the cattle herd, developed a reputation for fair dealing, and began breeding horses with careful attention to quality. Teresa managed the household finances, and her head for numbers proved invaluable. Together, they made a formidable team, each complementing the other's strengths. When James was 2, Teresa discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was easier this time, perhaps because she knew what to expect, though chasing after an active toddler while carrying another baby provided its own challenges. Owen hired Emma full-time, and the young woman had become almost part of the family, devoted to James and efficient with household tasks. Their second son arrived in March of 1876, during a spring storm that rattled the windows and drummed on the roof. The labor was shorter than with James, and when Mrs. Grant placed the squalling infant in Teresa's arms, she felt that same overwhelming rush of love, the same wonder that something so perfect could exist. "Another boy," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. "Teresa, you have given me 2 sons. I am the luckiest man alive." They named him Daniel Owen Turner, and James, allowed to meet his baby brother the next morning, stared with wide eyes before carefully patting Daniel's head with one chubby hand. "Baby," James pronounced solemnly. "My baby." "Yes, your brother," Teresa confirmed, her heart swelling at the sight of her 2 sons. "You are going to teach him everything, help him grow strong." James took his new role seriously, and as Daniel grew, the brothers developed a close bond. They were different in temperament, James bold and adventurous, Daniel more thoughtful and careful, but they complemented each other well. Teresa and Owen watched them play together, watched them explore the ranch, and knew they were building exactly the kind of family they had both dreamed of. Georgetown continued to grow and prosper. The railroad had reached the town in 1875, bringing new opportunities and increased commerce. Owen's horse breeding business benefited from easier transportation, and he was able to sell animals to buyers as far away as Kansas and Missouri. The ranch expanded again, and Owen hired 2 permanent ranch hands, young men who lived in the bunkhouse he had built and worked alongside him daily. Teresa finally achieved her dream of starting a school, though on a smaller scale than she had once imagined. She began by teaching the children of neighboring ranchers basic reading and arithmetic in her own home 2 afternoons a week. Word spread about her patience and skill, and soon she had 8 regular students. Owen built a small schoolroom addition to their house, and Teresa felt a deep satisfaction in shaping young minds, in giving these frontier children access to education that might otherwise be denied them. The tree remained a special place for their family. True to their promise, every year on the anniversary of the day they met, they would go to the oak and spend time beneath its branches. As the boys grew old enough to understand, Teresa and Owen told them the story of how their parents had met, how a carved heart had been the beginning of everything. "Papa put his name right next to Mama's," Owen would say, his hand in Teresa's. "Because sometimes you just know when something is right, and you have to be brave enough to claim it." James and Daniel would trace the faded initials with their small fingers, and Teresa knew they were absorbing more than just a family story. They were learning about courage and choice, about building a life according to your own vision rather than following someone else's plan. In 1878, when James was 4 and Daniel 2, Teresa's mother sent a letter. It was the first communication Teresa had received from her family since a terse response to her wedding announcement years earlier. The letter was hesitant, carefully worded, but the longing beneath the formal language was clear. Teresa's mother missed her daughter desperately and wanted to know if there was any possibility of reconciliation. Teresa sat at the kitchen table reading and rereading the letter, emotions swirling through her. She had made peace with her choice to leave, had built a life she loved, but she had never stopped missing her mother, never stopped wishing things could have been different. "What do you want to do?" Owen asked after she showed him the letter. "I want to write back," Teresa said slowly. "I want her to know about you, about the boys, about the life I have here. I want her to understand that I am happy, that leaving was the right choice." "Then write," Owen encouraged. "And tell her she is welcome to visit if she wants. This is your home, Teresa, but that does not mean you have to cut off everyone from your past." Teresa composed her response carefully, describing Georgetown and the ranch, her marriage to Owen, the births of James and Daniel. She included details about daily life, about teaching the local children, about how she had found purpose and love in a place her father had probably never heard of before she left. She extended the invitation to visit, though she suspected her mother would not be able to accept, would not have the strength to defy Teresa's father so openly. To her surprise, 6 months later, her mother arrived on the train, traveling alone in an act of defiance that must have cost her dearly. Teresa met her at the station with Owen and the boys, and the moment her mother stepped onto the platform, Teresa felt tears spill over. Her mother looked older, grayer, but her face when she saw Teresa lit with such joy that it erased the years of separation. "Mama," Teresa whispered, and then they were embracing, holding each other while happy tears flowed freely. Margaret Morgan's visit lasted 2 weeks, and during that time she got to know the family Teresa had built. She watched Owen with Teresa and the boys, saw the love and respect that formed the foundation of their marriage, and one night, sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, she took Teresa's hand. "I am so proud of you," Margaret said quietly. "Proud that you had the courage I never did, that you chose your own path. This life suits you, darling. You are happier than I ever saw you back home." "I wish you could have had this too," Teresa said. "Wish you could have had choices." "I have made my peace with my life," her mother replied. "But seeing you here, seeing what you have built, gives me such joy. I was so afraid when you left, so worried you were making a terrible mistake. Now I see you made the only choice you could, and it led you exactly where you needed to be." Before Margaret left, she spent an afternoon at the oak tree with Teresa and the family. She studied the initials carved in the bark, smiled at the story of how Teresa and Owen met, and placed her hand on the rough surface. "This tree brought you together," she said. "It will stand here long after we are all gone, a testament to the courage it took to carve your name into something permanent." After her mother returned to Philadelphia, Teresa felt a sense of peace she had not realized she was missing. The visit had been a bridge, connecting her past to her present in a way that felt healing. She and her mother began a regular correspondence, letters traveling back and forth that kept them connected despite the distance. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1880, Owen employed 5 ranch hands and had established himself as one of the most successful ranchers in the Georgetown area. The house had been expanded twice. Growing from the simple structure Owen had built into a comfortable home with enough space for their family and the life they were creating. James, now 6, showed an aptitude for working with horses that delighted Owen. The boy seemed to have an instinctive understanding of the animals. a gentleness combined with confidence that meant even the most skittish horse would settle under his small hands. Daniel, at 4, was more interested in books and learning, often sitting with Teresa during her teaching sessions and absorbing the lessons alongside the older children. "They are so different," Teresa remarked to Owen one evening, watching James demonstrate his riding skills while Daniel sat on the porch reading. "But both ours," Owen said with satisfaction. "Both exactly who they are supposed to be. We will encourage what makes each of them unique, not try to force them into being the same." In the spring of 1881, Teresa realized she was pregnant for a third time. She was 31 now, and though she felt healthy and strong, this pregnancy was harder than the previous two. She tired more easily, and by the time summer arrived, she was large enough that movement had become awkward. Mrs. Grant checked on her regularly, a slight furrow in her brow suggesting concern she did not voice aloud. "You rest as much as you can," the midwife instructed. "Let Emma handle the household. Let Owen manage everything else. Your job is to take care of yourself and this baby." Owen took the advice seriously, insisting Teresa spend her afternoons resting, bringing her meals in bed when she was too tired to come to the table. James and Daniel, sensing something was different, became protective of their mother, James especially taking it upon himself to keep his younger brother quiet when Mama was sleeping. The baby arrived in September, 2 weeks earlier than expected, and the labor was long and difficult. For several frightening hours, Mrs. Grant's concern became obvious, and Owen hovered nearby, his face pale with fear. But Teresa was strong, had survived childbirth twice before, and she pushed through the pain and exhaustion with determination. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, Mrs. Grant's relief was palpable. "A girl," she announced, cleaning the infant and wrapping her in blankets. "You have a daughter, Teresa, a beautiful, perfect daughter." Teresa held her daughter, this tiny girl with a surprising amount of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same blue as Owen's, and felt a different kind of love than what she had experienced with her sons. She loved James and Daniel completely, but there was something about this small female child that touched a part of her heart she had not known existed. "What should we name her?" Owen asked, his finger tracing their daughter's impossibly small hand. "Grace," Teresa said without hesitation. "Grace Margaret Turner, after both our mothers." Owen nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Grace, it is perfect. She is perfect. Teresa, you have given me the world, 3 healthy children, a life better than any I could have imagined. I do not know what I did to deserve this, to deserve you, but I thank God for it every single day." James and Daniel met their sister that afternoon, both boys fascinated by the tiny baby. James asked if he could hold her, and under careful supervision, Teresa placed Grace in her brother's arms. The look of wonder on his face, the careful way he supported her head exactly as instructed, made Teresa's heart swell. "I will protect her," James declared seriously. "Nobody will ever hurt my sister." "We will all protect her," Daniel added, not wanting to be left out. "We are her brothers." The addition of Grace to their family felt like a completion, as if something Teresa had not known was missing had finally clicked into place. The baby was easier than the boys had been, sleeping longer stretches and nursing well, and Teresa recovered from the difficult birth more quickly than she had expected. As Grace grew through her first year, she revealed a personality that was pure sunshine. She smiled easily, laughed often, and her presence seemed to brighten every room she entered. James and Daniel doted on their little sister, and she clearly adored her big brothers in return, her face lighting up whenever they came near. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Seasons marked by cattle drives and foaling seasons, by planting and harvest, by the small and large moments that create a life. James grew into a capable rider and handler, working alongside Owen and the ranch hands even as a young boy. Daniel discovered a passion for reading that matched Teresa's, and they spent countless hours discussing books and ideas. Grace charmed everyone she met, her sunny disposition and quick smile making her a favorite in Georgetown. By 1885, James was 11, Daniel 9, and Grace 4. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the county, and Owen's reputation as a horseman had spread throughout Texas. They had built a life of substance and meaning. Exactly what Owen had dreamed of that day, Teresa had carved her name in his tree. One autumn afternoon, the whole family made their annual pilgrimage to the oak. It had become a tradition not just for Owen and Teresa's anniversary, but for celebrating the family as a whole. They brought a picnic, spreading blankets beneath the branches that had sheltered the beginning of their love story. "Tell us again how you met," Grace demanded, as she did every year, despite having heard the story countless times. Teresa and Owen exchanged amused glances, then Owen began the familiar tale. "Your mama was carving her initials in my tree, trespassing on my property without permission." "Our tree," Teresa interjected as she always did. "Our tree," Owen agreed with a smile. "And I saw her there, this beautiful woman with her knife and her determination, marking this oak as if she owned it. And I thought to myself, that is the kind of woman who knows what she wants. That is the kind of woman I have been waiting for." "So Papa carved his name right next to Mama's," James continued, knowing the story by heart. "Right then, even though they had just met, because he knew." "Sometimes you just know," Owen confirmed, his hand finding Teresa's. "Sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind has not caught up to yet." After they ate, the children ran off to play, their laughter echoing across the ranch land. Teresa and Owen sat together beneath the tree, watching their children with the contentment that came from building exactly the life they wanted. "We did good," Owen said quietly. "We did," Teresa agreed. "Sometimes I think about that girl who ran away from Philadelphia, so scared and determined and uncertain. I wish I could tell her that everything would work out better than she could possibly imagine." "That girl had courage," Owen said. "She left everything familiar because she knew she deserved more than what was being offered. That courage brought her here, brought her to me. I will never take that for granted, Teresa. Never." She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders in a gesture so familiar it felt like breathing. Around them, the ranch stretched out, the land they had worked and shaped and made their own. The house stood solid in the distance, filled with evidence of their life together. Their children played in the golden autumn light, healthy and happy and secure in the knowledge that they were loved. "I would do it all again," Teresa said. "Every hard choice, every uncertain moment, it all led here to this, to us." "To us," Owen echoed and kissed her forehead. "Always and forever to us." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they called the children and packed up their picnic. Walking back to the house together, the five of them, a unit forged through love and choice and commitment, Teresa felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible back in her old life. The years continued their steady march forward. James, at 16, was already as capable as any of the ranch hands, strong and skilled and showing signs of inheriting his father's talent with horses. Daniel, at 14, had developed an interest in the business side of ranching, often sitting with Teresa to review accounts and discuss strategies for growth. Grace, at 9, was learning to ride with the same determination that characterized everything she did. though she also showed a talent for music, playing the piano Owen had surprised Teresa with on their 10th anniversary. In 1890, a severe drought hit Texas, testing the ranch in ways they had never experienced. Water sources dried up, grass withered, and cattle suffered. Owen worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep the herd alive, drilling new wells and transporting water from the creek that still held flow thanks to the deep springs that fed it. Teresa managed resources with careful precision, and the whole family pulled together to survive the crisis. During those hard months, Teresa saw the strength of what she and Owen had built. The ranch hands stayed loyal, working for reduced wages when money was tight. Neighbors helped each other, sharing resources and information about where grass could still be found. The community that had welcomed Teresa years ago now proved its worth, people supporting one another through genuine hardship. When the rains finally came in late summer, breaking the drought with storms that lasted for days, Teresa stood on the porch with Owen watching water pour from the sky, both of them crying tears of relief. "We made it," Owen said, his arm tight around her. "We survived." "We did," Teresa confirmed, "because we did it together, all of us." The drought had taken its toll. The herd was reduced by nearly a third and finances were strained, but they had survived when some neighboring ranches had not. The experience had tested them and proven they had the resilience to weather even the worst challenges. James turned 18 in 1892, and Owen decided it was time to officially make his eldest son a partner in the ranch. They celebrated with a dinner that included everyone who worked on the property, Owen raising a glass to toast James and the future. "This ranch was built on hard work and love," Owen said, his voice carrying across the assembled group. "My son has proven he has both in abundance. James is no longer just my son but my partner, and together we will continue building something that lasts." James, embarrassed by the attention but clearly proud, raised his own glass. "I learned everything from you, Pa. I hope to make you proud." "You already have, son. Every single day, you already have." Daniel, now 16, announced his intention to attend business school in Austin, wanting to develop skills that would help modernize the ranch's operations. Owen and Teresa supported his choice, proud that their son wanted to bring education back to the family business. Grace, at 13, was growing into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, and Teresa saw her own younger self in her daughter's independence and confidence. In the spring of 1893, tragedy struck when one of the ranch hands, a young man named Robert Chen who had worked for them for 5 years, was killed when his horse spooked and threw him into a ravine. The death hit the ranch family hard, Robert having been well-liked and skilled, and Owen and Teresa paid for his burial in Georgetown Cemetery and made sure his family back in California received the wages owed plus extra to help them survive the loss. The funeral reminded everyone of how fragile life could be, how quickly things could change. That evening after the service, the Turner family gathered on the porch, drawn together by grief and the need for reassurance. "Life is precious," Owen said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We do not know how much time we have, so we have to make every day matter. Tell the people you love that you love them. Build things that will outlast you. Leave the world better than you found it." Teresa held Grace close while James and Daniel stood near their father, and she thought about how much they had all grown, how much they had survived together. The ranch was more than land and cattle now. It was a testament to what could be built when people chose love over fear, when they committed to something larger than themselves. Daniel left for Austin in the fall, and the house felt emptier without his presence. but he wrote frequently, his letters full of enthusiasm for what he was learning and ideas for how to apply new business practices to ranch operations. Owen read the letters with pride, marveling at his son's mind, and Teresa felt satisfaction that they had encouraged both boys to pursue what called to them rather than forcing them into predetermined roles. James took on more responsibility with Daniel gone, and Owen began to step back slightly, letting his son make decisions and learn from both successes and mistakes. Watching James work reminded Owen of his younger self, that same determination to build something meaningful, and he knew the ranch would be in good hands when the time came to pass it on. Grace, at 14, had grown into a young woman who turned heads in Georgetown. Young men began appearing at the ranch with flimsy excuses for being there, and James appointed himself his sister's guardian, making it clear that anyone interested in Grace would have to meet very high standards. Grace tolerated her brother's protectiveness with good humor, though she made it equally clear she had no intention of seriously considering any suitor until she was much older. "I am not ready to think about marriage," she told Teresa one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "I want to experience more of life first, want to figure out who I am before I tie myself to someone else." "That is wise," Teresa said, thinking of her own young self running from an unwanted marriage. "Take your time. The right person will be worth waiting for, and they will wait for you too." In 1895, Margaret Morgan passed away peacefully in her sleep back in Philadelphia. The letter informing Teresa came from her father, his words stiff and formal even in grief. Teresa mourned her mother deeply, grateful for the reconciliation they had shared, grateful for those 2 weeks her mother had spent in Georgetown seeing the life her daughter had built. She wore black for months, and Owen supported her through the grief with quiet strength. Her father's letter included an unexpected addition. He had enclosed a substantial sum of money, explaining that it was Teresa's inheritance from her mother, who had specified in her will that Teresa should receive her personal savings and jewelry. The gesture felt like a final gift, her mother's way of continuing to support the daughter who had chosen her own path. "What do you want to do with it?" Owen asked after Teresa showed him the inheritance. She thought for a long moment, then said, "I want to build a proper school in Georgetown. Not just a few children in our home, but a real school where any child can come to learn, regardless of whether their family can pay. Mama always believed in education, and this feels like the right way to honor her memory." Owen supported the plan wholeheartedly, and by the spring of 1896, a small schoolhouse stood in Georgetown with Teresa Morgan Turner listed as its founder. She hired a young teacher from Austin, a woman named Helen Price, who shared Teresa's passion for education, and the school opened with 20 students. Teresa continued to teach part-time while managing the school's operations, and watching children file through the doors each morning filled her with deep satisfaction. Daniel returned from Austin in late 1896, his education complete and his head full of ideas. He and Owen spent long hours discussing ways to improve ranch operations, and Daniel's suggestions, based on the latest business practices and scientific breeding principles, began to be implemented. The combination of Owen's experience and instinct with Daniel's modern knowledge proved powerful, and the ranch entered a new period of growth and prosperity. James, at 22, had developed into a man any father would be proud of, strong and capable and fair in his dealings. He had a gift for understanding animals that went beyond mere skill, and horses that would trust no one else would settle under his hands. Owen knew that when the time came, James would be able to run the ranch successfully, but he was in no hurry to fully retire, still finding joy and purpose in the daily work. Grace turned 16 in 1896, and her birthday celebration filled the house with friends and laughter. She had grown into a beautiful young woman with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, her personality as bright and engaging as ever. She helped at the school Teresa had founded, showing a natural talent for working with younger children, and Teresa wondered if her daughter might eventually take over the teaching role. The oak tree continued to stand as a symbol for their family, its branches spreading wider each year, providing shade and shelter. The initials Owen and Teresa had carved decades ago were now weathered and softened by time, but still visible to anyone who looked, a permanent record of where their story had begun. On a warm evening in May of 1897, the Turner family gathered beneath the oak for what had become their annual tradition. James brought his horse to show his father a new training technique he had developed. Daniel talked about his latest ideas for improving breeding records. Grace picked wildflowers to weave into her mother's hair. Owen and Teresa sat together, watching their children with the contentment that came from a life well lived. 24 years, Owen said quietly, his hand finding Teresa's. 24 years since I found you carving your name in my tree. Our tree, Teresa corrected automatically, smiling. And the best 24 years of my life. Every day with you, every moment building this family and this life has been a gift. We should update our initials, Owen suggested suddenly. Carve them fresh so they will last another 24 years. Teresa laughed but agreed, and Owen pulled out his knife. Their children gathered to watch as he carefully retraced the letters they had carved so long ago, deepening them, making them permanent again. Then he passed the knife to Teresa, and she did the same, her hand steadier now with age and experience, but her heart just as full as it had been that first day. When they finished, Owen carved the date below their initials, 1873, 1897. So anyone who sees this will know how long we lasted, he explained. And someday when we are gone, our children and grandchildren will see it and know that love like ours was real, was possible, was worth choosing. James stepped forward and asked, "Can we add our initials too?" All of us, to show we were part of this story. Owen and Teresa exchanged glances, then Owen handed his son the knife. One by one, their children carved their own initials into the oak, surrounding their parents' names with their own, creating a family tree in the most literal sense. JHT and DOT and GMT joined OT and TM on the ancient bark, a record of the family that had grown from one woman's brave choice to carve her name in a stranger's tree. As the last light of day faded and stars began to emerge, the Turner family walked back to their house together. Teresa paused at the top of the porch steps to look back at the oak silhouetted against the darkening sky, and Owen's arms came around her from behind. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, "for being brave enough to carve your name, for being brave enough to say yes, for giving me this life." "Thank you for carving your name beside mine," Teresa replied, "for seeing something in a trespassing stranger worth taking a chance on, for building this with me." They stood together watching the night deepen over the land they had claimed and shaped and made their own, surrounded by the family their love had created. And Teresa thought about how one moment, one choice, one act of courage could change everything. She had run from Philadelphia seeking freedom and found so much more. Love and partnership and purpose, a family that filled her days with meaning, a legacy that would outlast her. In the years that followed, the Turner Ranch continued to thrive across generations. James eventually married Sarah Wellington's daughter, Emma, in 1899, and they gave Owen and Teresa their first grandchild, a boy named Owen James Turner, in 1900. Daniel married Helen Price, the teacher from Teresa's school, in 1901, and they had twin girls in 1902. Grace, true to her word about waiting, did not marry until she was 24, finally accepting the proposal of a young veterinarian who moved to Georgetown in 1904 and proved patient enough to wait for her to be ready. Owen and Teresa grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and long lives, but their love remained as strong as ever. They sat on their porch each evening, hands clasped, watching their grandchildren play in the yard and marveling at how full their lives had become. In the spring of 1910, as Owen approached 62 and Teresa turned 50, they made another trip to their tree. It had become a pilgrimage they made together whenever life felt overwhelming or particularly good, needing to reconnect with the place where their story had begun. The oak had grown even more impressive with time, its trunk thick and solid, its branches reaching high and wide. They stood together studying the initials carved in the bark, now weathered again despite Owen's refresh years earlier, surrounded by the marks their children had made. Owen pulled out his knife and carved one more addition below all the others, forever. "That is how long," he said, turning to Teresa. "That is how long I will love you, not just until death but beyond it forever." Teresa, her eyes bright with tears, pulled him close and kissed him as if they were young again, as if 24 years had not passed since that first afternoon beneath this tree. "Forever," she agreed, "in this life and whatever comes after." They lived into their old age together, Owen working the ranch until his body finally forced him to stop at 70, turning full control over to James while Daniel managed the business side from an office they had built in Georgetown. Teresa continued teaching until she was 60, then passed the school fully to Helen while she focused on being grandmother to a growing collection of grandchildren who adored her stories and her gentle wisdom. On Owen's 75th birthday, in 1923, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that seemed to include half of Georgetown. 3 generations of Turners filled the house and yard, along with ranch hands past and present, neighbors, friends, everyone who had been touched by Owen and Teresa's life together. James organized the event with his characteristic thoroughness, making sure his father was properly honored. During the celebration, Owen stood to speak, his voice not as strong as it once was but still carrying clear emotion. 50 years ago, I found a woman carving her name in my tree. I was 25 years old with nothing but a piece of land and a lot of dreams. That woman said yes when I asked her to share those dreams, and together we built all of this." He gestured to encompass the ranch, the family, everything. "Every good thing in my life traces back to that moment. Every bit of happiness, every success, every person I love exists because Teresa Morgan was brave enough to carve her name in a stranger's tree, and I was smart enough to carve mine right beside it." Teresa stood and moved to his side, and the whole gathering applauded as they kissed, this elderly couple who had built a life that mattered, who had created a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. Owen Turner died peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 77, with Teresa beside him as she had been for 52 years of marriage. He simply did not wake one morning, his heart having finally worn out after a lifetime of hard work and deep feeling. Teresa grieved him as deeply as the day she had said yes, her sorrow profound but mixed with gratitude for the years they had shared. She lived 3 more years without him, though everyone could see that part of her had died with Owen. She spent her days with her children and grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom, making sure the next generation understood where they came from and what had been sacrificed and built to create their lives. She taught them about courage and choice, about the importance of following your heart even when it meant leaving everything familiar behind. On a warm June afternoon in 1928, Teresa walked out to the oak tree, moving slowly with the aid of a cane but determined to make the journey alone. She stood beneath the branches studying the trunk where their initials had been carved 55 years earlier. They were faded now, barely visible, worn smooth by decades of weather and growth, but she could still see them, could still remember the exact moment Owen had placed his name beside hers. Grace found her there an hour later, sitting with her back against the trunk, a peaceful expression on her face. She had died quietly beneath the tree where her love story had begun, choosing to return there at the end. Grace wept even as she recognized the rightness of it, the beautiful symmetry of her mother beginning and ending in the same place. They buried Teresa beside Owen in Georgetown Cemetery, her stone reading Teresa Morgan Turner, 1848–1928, beloved wife, mother, teacher, friend. The funeral filled the church beyond capacity, testimony to how many lives she had touched. But the true memorial stood in the oak tree on what was still called the Turner Ranch, though it had been expanded and modernized and changed in countless ways. The initials were barely visible now, faded into the bark, but everyone in the family knew they were there. The tree became a pilgrimage site for generations of Turners, a place they would bring their own children to tell the story of Owen and Teresa, of how a woman carved her name in a tree and a cowboy carved his right beside it. And from that simple act of courage and recognition, a whole family had grown. James Turner ran the ranch until his own death in 1947, passing it to his son, Owen James, who ran it until 1975. Daniel's descendants eventually took over the business operations, while James's descendants managed the land and cattle, the partnership between the two branches of the family continuing what their fathers had begun. Grace's children and grandchildren became doctors and teachers and builders, spreading across Texas and beyond, but always coming back to Georgetown for family gatherings, always making time to visit the tree. The oak lived on, growing larger and more impressive with each passing decade. During storms, people would worry it might fall, but it stood firm, its roots deep in Texas soil, its branches a shelter and monument. People who did not know the story would sometimes picnic in its shade, and if they looked closely at the trunk, they might see the faintest outline of what looked like initials carved long ago, though by the 1950s and 60s, they were more legend than visible reality. In 1973, the Turner family organized a celebration for the 100th anniversary of Owen and Teresa's meeting. Descendants came from across the country, more than 200 people who could trace their lineage back to a cowboy, and a woman from Philadelphia who had chosen each other beneath an oak tree. They gathered at the ranch, now run by Owen and Teresa's great-great-grandson, and held a ceremony beneath the tree. The current generation had commissioned a small bronze plaque, which they mounted on a stone near the tree's base. It read, "On this spot in 1873, Owen Turner found Teresa Morgan carving her name in his tree. He carved his right beside it, and from that moment, a family grew. This tree stands as a reminder that courage, love, and choice can create legacies that last forever." They planted flowers around the base, created a small seating area, and made the tree officially part of the ranch's heritage. Local historians became interested in the story, and it was written up in Texas history books as an example of frontier romance and the building of lasting families in the post-Civil War West. The ranch itself eventually became a historical site, preserved by the Turner family as a working ranch, but also as a monument to what their ancestors had built. School groups would visit to learn about frontier life, about ranching and cattle and horses, and they would always be taken to see the tree, to hear the story of Owen and Teresa. In the 21st century, long after everyone who had known Owen and Teresa personally had passed away, their story still lived on. Genealogy enthusiasts traced their family trees back to the Turners, discovering they were descended from the couple whose love story had become legend. The oak tree, now ancient and supported by careful conservation efforts, still stood, though its top branches had been lost to lightning strikes and age. A great-great-great-great-granddaughter named Teresa Turner, named for her famous ancestor, defended a doctoral thesis in 2015 about women who immigrated west in the 1870s, using her own family history as a case study. She interviewed descendants, reviewed preserved letters and documents, and reconstructed Teresa Morgan's journey from Philadelphia to Georgetown with scholarly precision. The resulting book became a bestseller, introducing Owen and Teresa's story to a whole new generation. Through it all, the tree stood witness, its trunk bearing the faint ghosts of initials carved in 1873 by two people who could not have imagined the legacy they were creating. The oak had sheltered their first conversation, their courtship, their marriage proposal, their children and grandchildren and generations beyond. It had stood through droughts and storms, through wars and depressions and social upheavals, a constant in a changing world. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the Texas sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, people swore they could feel something special in the air beneath those branches, a presence that suggested love like Owen and Teresa's never truly died but lived on in the place where it had been born, carved into wood and earth and family and memory, eternal as the tree itself, lasting forever just as Owen had promised when he carved that final word into the bark all those years ago. The story of how he found her carving her name in his tree, and how the cowboy carved his right beside it, became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of choice, to the courage it takes to claim what your heart recognizes as true, to the way one moment can echo across generations, shaping lives not yet lived, creating futures not yet imagined, all because one woman was brave enough to carve her name into a stranger's tree, and one man was wise enough to see that as an invitation to carve his name right beside hers.